Well, government says that people building homes on floodplains has contributed to the destruction and loss of life we've seen in the Eastern Cape this week. Residents in places like Mthatha and Butterworth are now being housed in temporary shelters after their homes were submerged in floodwater. It's not clear how many will be able to rebuild or be resettled on safer ground. Let's talk about this now with Hangwelani Magidimisha-Chipungu, who's a professor of town and regional planning with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor, a very good evening to you. Good to have you on the SABC. We've been looking at images coming out of the Eastern Cape this week. In some areas, some villages, homes completely hidden or covered in rainwater. What red flags does that raise for you as someone who works in the town planning space?
Good evening, Tembekile, to you and to all your viewers. Obviously, when you see something like that, the first thing you want to ask yourself is that, was this area zoned for people to live in? Are the people supposed to be living here, or people, they just decided to live there? And we have got some information which is coming through the media to say some of the people there who are staying in that area in the Eastern Cape, actually they just locate themselves. So it's not a zone area for residential area. So that is cause of concern, because when we allocate people piece of land, we have to do a due diligence, checking whether this area is far from the floodplain. And if it's far from floodplain, we also have to look at the slope analysis, whether we're able to put our drainage system in a meaningful way, such that when we have events like this, we don't lose people's lives.
What's also interesting to see is that when we typically have the conversation around people building along floodplains, in many minds it centers around the upshoot or springing up of informal settlements. But in the areas around Mthatha, you're seeing brick and mortar structures also built in these areas. Who should have been responsible for ensuring that ultimately that was not happening?
Yeah, so it's a number of layers on that one, because one, people themselves, they need to be educated, and I don't think we are doing a lot of that on where to reside, because there's an assumption that every piece of land is a piece of land that you can put your house structure and live in, which is not always the case. And I think South Africans need to be educated around that not every piece of land is meant for living by human beings. The other issue is the issue around what we call development control. So since we know widely that some areas are closer to floodplain, and we know the consequences of that, and we have experienced this in the country, obviously you would expect developmental control for people within that particular municipality to say, we cannot allow development to go on in these particular areas. And that way, then you have to either relocate people and come up with a strategy of relocating people. That's another issue. The other issue is the issue around how do we interact with our environment? Once, because you mentioned something very critical to say, the houses which are there is not like really informal settlement. But what you are not talking about is that actually the houses which are there, most of them, they do not even have gutter. So they are still not yet at the up to standard where we say the house must look like that. So if you have a house which does not have gutter, where is that water going? The drainage system is not there. You do not have the gutter. And the area we are looking at, as you can see in those images, is that it's relatively flat, right? So if an area is flat, the water does not move to any particular angle, because obviously it's flat across. So those are some of the issues that we need to also consider.
And custodianship of the land is another element when you consider the vast rural areas in the Eastern Cape also affected by the storms this week. Is that a more difficult geographically space to manage in terms of building in the appropriate areas, but also having people come in perhaps to do the checks to say, actually, it's not safe to build here because if there is excessive rainfall, you will come into serious trouble?
No, I don't think it's difficult, because development control is something that we're supposed to be doing almost every day. It's part of what you should have an office within the municipality which do exactly that. So you go around the area, you look at the areas, the structures which are coming, and you have to do that before actually so many people that can come into that particular environment. So it's not something impossible, it's not something not doable. But the question is, do we have people who are willing to also listen? Because some of the challenges that our planners complain about is the residents themselves. That will tell you that we've been staying here for some time, and people, they've been staying here for years and nothing has happened. So we're going to come back and stay here. So it becomes a problem. So we need to enforce law, but also indicate and try to educate people to say, you're going to have to listen to professionals when they're talking about this, especially in the events like this, because extreme weather events are here to stay for the longest time.
And Professor, is the advice then that people should be in these areas completely resettled to other parts of the Eastern Cape, or is there a safer way to then build in the same areas with the consideration that ultimately they are more prone to experience excessive flooding?
Yeah, you see, the issue of the decision to relocate or not to relocate is not an easy one, because you're going to have to look at a number of things. And I'm not able to pronounce on that until I actually visit the site and maybe do some site analysis. But if then we find that the area is at the point where we cannot resuscitate it, we cannot build on it, we cannot afford as the country to build on that particular piece of land, people need to be relocated. But also we need to come up with a sound relocation strategies. Where are you going to put them? Do you have a better way out? Or what is the cost implication? Do we have the resources? And are you not going to disturb their livelihood? Because very often people in South Africa, they locate themselves following economic activities of some sort. So there should be a reason why people, they choose specific area. I always say that people, they are voting on with their own feet to say, we want to be here because this is closer to economic activities. So even when you relocate them, you must be almost certain that you're taking them to a decent enough space where they will be able to function.
Because people do move to these areas to be close to basic services and economic opportunities. It's a reminder whenever we have here in Johannesburg the conversations around informal settlements along the Yexke River, for example, that floods quite frequently, but people go back because they say if they're there, they're able to walk to places of work in Sandton and surrounds. But you mentioned the possibility of resuscitating a floodplain to make it more suitable for people to build. What would that process entail? Because from what I'm hearing from you, it can be quite expensive.
Yeah, so it depends on what is the founding on the ground. I won't able to say what exactly needs to be done in that.
No, just generally, I don't want us to speak to the specifics, but I'm just interested in what the options would be, so to speak.
Yeah, so your immediate option will obviously have to do, you have to come up with a plan to say you want to resuscitate the area and to make sure that people, they stay here. But also you have to then start putting the basic things like your drainage system. How are you going to channel the water? And I indicated if you are dealing with this slope for about 100 gradient, that is very flat. So how are you going to put the slope to make sure that your drainage system is able to collect the water? What other what we call green infrastructure you're going to put in place, and also the buffer. So buffer which will act as a collector and of water when the water comes, to make sure that it doesn't go to residential areas. You want to put some of those green infrastructure, but you also want to make sure that people are aware how they're supposed to build their houses, but also, like I mentioned earlier on, in terms of the gutter, and make sure that their water is directed to a particular area in a well-coordinated manner. And if you try to do that, then you are certain, if you are certain that after you do all that, people, they will be able to survive when the water comes, then you may consider that. But also you must understand one of the areas which is affected, where we're talking about the school children one, is also closer to the river. So maybe you want to look at the possibility of river channelization, because the river is very, it's not deep, it's not wide, and you want to look at that and maybe work on the river channelization to make sure that perhaps when there's water, then we are able to manage that, because that river is not a very big river.
Good to talk to you, Professor Hangwelani Magidimisha-Chipungu, Professor of Town and Regional Planning with the University of KwaZulu-Natal.